American singer and songwriter Jewel Kilcher, more commonly known as simply Jewel, has sold over 30 million albums worldwide. She is best known for her soulful ballads, but has also dabbled in other genres as well. Raised in Homer, Alaska, Jewel and her father would earn a living by singing in bars and taverns. As she grew up, she learned to yodel and play guitar. When she was 15 years old, she moved out of her father's house. She lived in an unheated cabin for a time, horseback riding or hitchhiking into work each day. By 1993, Jewel decided to move down south. She began writing her own songs and performing them in coffee houses. It wasn't easy, however. While living in Southern California, she turned down the advances of her employer and didn't get her paycheck. She was turned out of her apartment and was forced to live out of her car. To make ends meet, she drove around the country singing in cafes and working as a barista. Jewel was discovered by Inga Weinstein in August 1993 after another singer told her about a girl that sang in a local coffee shop. Curious, she drove out with a representative from Atlantic Records. After the show, they called the head of the company and asked him to pay for the girl's demo. Jewel's debut album, Pieces of You, was released in 1995. Steve Jobs. As co-founder and CEO of Apple Inc., the late Steve Jobs was a household name. The technology he created changed millions of lives. Before he passed in October 2011, his net worth was $10.2 billion. Though many didn't realize it, Jobs was adopted. His parents were a young, unwed Syrian couple. His mother came to San Francisco to give birth, and he was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. They struggled at first, as Jobs was a difficult child. As he grew, he became fascinated by his adoptive father's mechanical work, which gave him an outlet. By the time he was 10 years old, he had developed a love of electronics. He had also befriended many of the engineers in their neighborhood, though he had difficulty with children his own age. Traditional schooling bored him, but he was hungry for knowledge at the same time. By 1972, Jobs was headed off to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. However, the college was very expensive and Jobs' parents had a difficult time affording it. They used their life savings to get him into the best school that they could. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for a dorm room. In a 2005 commencement speech for Stanford University, Jobs admitted that during his time at Reed College, he was homeless and slept on the floor of a friend's dorm room. He would return empty Coca-Cola bottles for money to buy food and got free weekly meals from the local Hare Krishna temple. James Franco. Despite growing up in California, James Franco was more of a math whiz type of kid than an actor. Encouraged by his mother, Franco began acting in high school plays. He had his share of problems growing up, such as small run-ins with the police for underage drinking, but never anything too serious. By his late teens, Franco cleaned up his act and began to pursue a career. He worked nights at McDonald's, practicing different accents on the customers while paying for acting lessons. His first big break came in 1999 when he was cast in a leading role on NBC's Freaks and Geeks. Though he loved his television role, he wanted to try bigger things. He began taking his roles more seriously, really trying to get into the headspace of his characters. Franco would completely immerse himself in his roles. When he was cast as the lead in a 2001 biographical film about James Dean, he began smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day and bleached his dark hair blonde. He continued this practice in other roles as well. In 2002, Franco was seen panhandling and living on the streets. Despite appearances, though, Franco was never really homeless. He was once again immersing himself in a different mindset to better understand a character. In this case, a homeless addict for his part in City by the Sea. Franco lived on the streets for several days, conversing with the people he met there. Chris Pratt. It's hard to imagine that someone like Chris Pratt could ever have been anything but a star. After all, isn't he Star-Lord? Well, before Pratt took on his role as Andy in Parks and Recreation, he was homeless. He grew up in Lake Stevens, Washington, though he was born in Virginia, Minnesota. From the time he was a young boy, Pratt wanted to be famous. When he was in high school, he remembered his wrestling coach asking him what he wanted to be when he grew up. This was his answer: famous. However, he had no idea how he would accomplish it. After dropping out of community college, he began working as a discount ticket salesman and daytime dancer. However, it wasn't enough. While living in Maui, Hawaii, Pratt became homeless. Thankfully, he still had his van, complete with a depiction of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo painted on the side. His job at the time only paid enough to cover his gas and food. When he was 19 years old, he was working at the Bubba Gum Shrimp Company restaurant in Maui when actress Rae Dawn Chong walked in. Pratt was waiting tables when Chong decided he'd be perfect for a role in her short horror film Cursed Part 3. From there, his luck turned around. Now he has a net worth of $30 million. Jennifer Lopez. We were certainly fooled by the rocks that she got. Despite referring to herself as Jenny from the Block in her iconic song, her net worth is $320 million. Jennifer Lopez, otherwise known as J-Lo, was born in the Bronx. As a child, her family had little money but still wanted the best for their 3 daughters. Lopez and her sisters were enrolled in singing and dancing lessons. Her parents said it was to keep them out of trouble and would also teach them good work ethic. While in her final year at Preston High School, Lopez learned about a film that was casting teenage girls for small parts. She auditioned for My Little Girl in 1986 and received a role. It was in that moment that Lopez realized acting was her dream. She wanted her parents to be happy, so she enrolled in Baruch College. After 1 semester, she dropped out and told her parents about her dream. They insisted that no Latinos do that and that it was a bad idea. The disagreement caused Lopez to leave the family home when she was 18 years old. She had nowhere to go and ended up homeless. She spent many nights sleeping on a cot in dance studios, but she didn't give up. Within a year, Lopez had become a fly girl dancer and danced her way into the spotlight. It's incredible, isn't it, how far they've come? Here's our quiz question for you. Do you know which Hollywood star has the highest net worth? Stay tuned to find out. Sylvester Stallone. Just about everyone can identify Sylvester Stallone nowadays, either by his distinctive voice or iconic appearance. However, in the early 1970s, Stallone was living on the streets. He'd been evicted from his apartment and was forced to find work fast. In order to make ends meet, Stallone appeared in an off-Broadway stage play and several small film roles throughout the early 70s. He even appeared in a softcore film for which he was paid $200. However, it still wasn't enough. In desperate need of cash, Stallone sold his dog for $50, or so the story goes. Don't worry, he later bought him back. Following this heartbreaking decision, Stallone began writing. It took him nearly 4 days to complete, but at the end of it, he'd come up with the idea for Rocky, the story of a down-and-out boxer. It still wasn't easy, however. Stallone attempted to sell the script to several studios, but they all turned him down when he insisted on playing the lead himself. Eventually, Irwin Winkler and Robert Chardoff took an interest in the script, but weren't keen on Stallone as the lead. Stallone was unwilling to negotiate, and the 3 eventually came to an agreement. They certainly didn't expect the film to become so successful. Rocky was nominated for multiple awards, including Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay. Chris Gardner. Before he became a multi-millionaire, Chris Gardner had a hard life. In 1980, Gardner began an affair with a young dental student. She became pregnant, so he left his wife and moved in with her. At first, everything was fine, but he wanted more. It was then that he met a stockbroker while on a sales call. He decided to dedicate his life to the world of finance following a conversation with the man. He bought a Ferrari, quit his job, and began his training. That's when it all went downhill. Gardner showed up ready to work, only to find out that his hiring manager had been fired, leaving him without a job. To make matters worse, he owed nearly $1,200 in parking tickets, and things with his girlfriend were falling apart. She left with his son after Gardner spent 10 days in jail for the unpaid tickets. After finding a new job, he was able to get his son back, but the flop house he was living in did not allow children. Despite having a good job, he and his son were homeless. He hid it for over a year until he could get them a proper house. The movie The Pursuit of Happiness, starring Will Smith, is actually based on Gardner's life. Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio has risen through the Hollywood ranks from teenage heartthrob to well-respected film star. It hasn't always been that way, however. Many would think that growing up in Hollywood would be a dream, but for DiCaprio, it was more akin to a nightmare. He grew up in a rough neighborhood plagued with all kinds of illicit activity. Thankfully, in the early 90s, he was finally able to break into television as young Luke Brower, a homeless boy in the ABC sitcom Growing Pains. DiCaprio admitted that he felt for his character as he too had once been homeless. Things changed for him in 1992 when DiCaprio made his big screen debut. Robert De Niro had personally picked him out of 400 other young actors for a lead role in this boy's life. This helped pave the way for him to enter the industry. His rise to stardom saw him featured in several other roles before finally hitting it big in 1996's Romeo and Juliet. His new heartthrob image was what made James Cameron offer him the role of Jack Dawson in his 1997 film Titanic. DiCaprio initially refused, but Cameron encouraged him to pursue the role. It ended up changing his life. The film grossed more than $1.843 billion worldwide. DiCaprio's fan base erupted into what would later become known as Leo Mania, as he appeared on the cover of at least 4 teen magazines. Jim Carrey. Today, Jim Carrey is one of the best-known comedians in the industry. His roles as a pet detective and many others have tickled our funny bones and made us guffaw with laughter. However, things weren't always so bright and cheery for the funny man. Before he was a multi-millionaire, he was just a kid with a dream. Back when Carey was growing up in Ontario, Canada, his father lost his accounting job. Carey was just a young teen at the time. Before long, the family lost their home and were forced to live in a Volkswagen camper van for 8 months while Carey's father looked for a new job. By the time he was 16 years old, Carey himself dropped out of school and began working full-time as a janitor. He later described these as some of his darkest years. His only outlet was his comedy. He began performing stand-up routines at small local clubs. At first, he struggled, but as time went on, he was able to polish his act. He went from open mic nights to paid shows as his reputation improved. By the early 1980s, Carey was a rising star in comedy and even opened for comedian Rodney Dangerfield on tour in Las Vegas. By 1994, Carey broke into the film industry. He was cast as the lead in Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Ed Sheeran. English singer and songwriter Ed Sheeran is pretty well known now, but before he got his big break, he sang in a local church choir. He began recording music in 2004 and performed in small venues. However, between 2008 and 2010, he sometimes found himself without a bed to sleep in. At times, he had to sleep on the Central Line or outside of Buckingham Palace while playing gigs in and around London. Other times, he would stay with friends, moving from couch to couch. He even admitted that sometimes at the end of a show, he'd ask the audience if anyone had somewhere he could spend the night. Despite some of the struggles he went through during his early career, he decided to buy a ticket to Los Angeles in April 2010. He only had one gig lined up, but his mind decided to go anyway. After that one gig, he played open mic nights all over the city. He was performing one night when he was spotted by Jamie Foxx, who was impressed by Sheeran's skills. He offered to let Sheeran use his recording studio and stay in his Hollywood home for a while. unbelievable. Do you know what's even more astounding, though? That Rupert Murdoch has a net worth of $12.9 billion. There you have it, folks. Thankfully, these stars were able to get back on their feet and then some. Did you enjoy the video? Be sure to check out our featured content. Please feel free to wander over to our video section for more entertainment. And if you haven't done so already, click that subscribe button so you're never left in the dark about your favorite celebrities. Thanks for watching.